Origin just wants to reaction. This is you won't believe how the CIA is helping Ukraine win the war. I knew it. I told you. I knew it. This was a channel of the military show, so it could be like biased, but I don't know, right? Nobody so far has told me in the comments, at least overwhelmingly, that information is point blank false or something. So this I'm hoping this is like somewhat truth to this, because it's like one of the titles I've been waiting for. Somebody make a video about it, and somebody did, because I always like, okay, Five Eyes and all that, CIA and like others must be helping Ukraine because the level of precision they have. Like, come on, really? Ukraine can't just do that, right? This is the problem with Ukraine-Russia war. This will warp people's like mentality of how war is done and how people can do it. Because Ukraine does certain, really precise thing, gets a really good intel. Like, okay, if Ukraine can do this, surely somebody is like, let's say, if China goes to war, India goes to war, something like that, surely they would get the same type of intel. Not really. I'm pretty sure US is helping. And US is different. CIA is different. Their budget, the level they are flying right now, right, top of the charts level, their technology and everything, that's different, right? The level of precision they can have is different. So I always assume like there must be like intelligence, CIA intelligence, things like that behind it. So yeah, I hope there's more detail in this video. So it's going to be interesting. Let's watch it.
A is doing what? If you're a small country invaded by a larger, wealthier neighbor, how could you possibly defend yourself? Ukraine has faced this exact scenario, but thanks to an unprecedented intelligence revolution, they've managed to turn the tides against Russia. But how did Ukraine pull off such an intelligence coup? The answer lies in the shadowy world of espionage, where the CIA and Western intelligence agencies have been secretly helping Ukraine stay a step ahead of Russian forces. With real-time insights and advanced technology, Ukrainians often know when and where their enemy will strike. This knowledge has not only saved countless lives, but also shattered Russia's best chances of winning the war. How did this partnership come about, and what has been its impact on the battlefield? Stick around to uncover the hidden story of how the CIA is helping Ukraine win the war.
Wait a minute, does he know that, or is he speculating? Because if he knows that, that means they like made the information open, like, yeah, we are the one helping them with the intelligence and everything. But is that a problem? Like, would Russia like, see, it's like I'm against USA or something, like sending threats or something. Because I'm pretty sure Russia would send threats, right? US is directly helping Ukraine, this and that, like giving equipment is one thing, giving intelligence a whole other thing, this and that. But is there a difference? It's like giving equipment, giving intelligence. Where do you draw the line where you say, oh, that's different, right? I'm pretty sure the only line you can think of is like putting troops on the ground, that's it. If you send equipment, intelligence, isn't that kind of like an aid in itself? I don't know.
Dive into the origins of this extraordinary alliance. Since before the invasion, the Ukrainians have had access to excellent and detailed intelligence about their enemy. While it would have been hard to miss the military buildup along Ukraine's borders in 2021, the United States had increasingly specific knowledge that an invasion was coming. For example, Russia's Zapad exercise in September 2021 was noticeably larger than the previous year's version. While this could have been the result of a loosening of pandemic mitigation measures, Washington's intelligence apparatus wasn't fooled. Putin's own manifesto about Ukraine 2 months earlier, the disposition and composition of the forces, cybernetic information, and other sources revealed that any movement of these troops built up along the border was unlikely to be a simple military exercise. Putin could not conceal it as a training mission. One result of the extensive intelligence the United States and its allies collected before the invasion was that the wider world mobilized with an unusually high degree of symphony. Within a matter of days, Russia was largely isolated from most of the world's advanced economies, while Ukraine was getting a continual flow of the military and economic aid it would need to survive the conflict. The intelligence was even more specific than this, though. Arguably, Russia lost its best chance to win the war when its attack on the Hostomel airport outside of Kyiv failed. Russia's original plan was to create a so-called air corridor by having its supposedly elite paratrooper units capture strategic airports. Once that was done, it would fly in the tanks, artillery, and other heavy equipment it would need to take control of major population centers. Unfortunately for Putin,
oh shit, I see that. Whoa, so that failed, huh? I see that, like, there is not much of access when it comes to Russia and Ukraine, not like how German Autobahn or American interstate system is, obviously. There are like few bridges here and there, few roads here and there. But yeah, if you have like control over a lot of airfield and you like dominate very early on, make sure the SAMs and things like anti-air defenses are taken down, you basically defeated Ukraine like that in like a week or two, right? So that didn't happen. They were banking on that, right? Because yeah, once you have like a mass, Russia probably has like massive stockpile of cargo planes and things like that, right? So they would just use that to like supply troops and handle logistics and things. But that didn't work, and it become like a slow moving war type of way where you have to worry about every square mile, every square meter, let alone mile, and like slow warfare become, right? That's how it became, which became a problem. And then like we know how it all like progresses slowly, right? Like I think it's like everybody just doing their thing willy-nilly, right? Nobody has a game plan, because the game plan was like war's gonna be over really fast, but it didn't, right? So right now everybody's just like winging it. Let's see what happens. That's the only thing that makes sense to me, because all the problems like Russian military, how they're not prepared, certain tanks are not prepared, how tanks are failing, implying they didn't check in advance if tanks gonna work or not, because they were not planning on that. They thought the war would be over fast. So Russia also got caught off guard with this kind of like a slow moving war, because they weren't planning for that. Clearly, that's how it looks. So they were planning to take over all the airports and things.
The American intelligence community caught on to the idea. The Ukrainians graciously received this information and prepared accordingly. Meanwhile, the Russians were unprepared for the level of resistance they would receive at the airport or anywhere else. Ukraine fended off the attack, and the invasion that was supposed to end in a few days turned into 2.5 years of war. Russia's inability to establish its so-called air corridor resulted in the famous stalled columns outside of Kyiv. That was when Western leaders began to realize that Ukraine wouldn't fall in days as they had feared. In other words, the only intelligence failure the West had about Russia was to overestimate its strength. Once it became clear that this intelligence was in error, the West sprung into high gear, delivering more and more lethal aid to Ukraine, albeit not at the pace the Ukrainians wanted. The episode at Hostomel was, in a way, the culmination of an intelligence partnership between Washington and Kyiv that stretches back over the previous decade. In this regard, Ukraine benefited from the deep institutional experience the United States had built since the end of World War II. Much of Washington's current intelligence infrastructure was created for the specific purpose of monitoring and countering Russia. The CIA, which has had the most impact in Ukraine, was created in 1947 as a result of that year's National Security Act. The NSA was formed by President Truman in 1952. The Soviet Union was the impetus for both of these events.
And see, when I hear about things like this, I'm like, is Putin really paranoid? I mean, come on. When you create these whole agencies, and when you create NSA and things like just to monitor Soviet Union, right? You create this infrastructure of intelligence just to monitor one specific country, Moscow in general, right? Moscow and Kremlin. When you do that, is Putin really paranoid when he thinks like, oh, everybody's coming to get me type of way? Because if over time, like after fall of like Cold War and things, right, after fall of Soviet Union, right, if US drastically changes infrastructure to not keep an eye on Russia and like former Soviet countries and things, maybe like people will be like, oh, I guess we're fine now. But I'm pretty sure that they didn't change their strategy. That's how they are helping in the Ukraine in the first place, right? So you can see the paranoia there. It's not full on paranoia when you see things like that, because surely Putin and like what is it, FSB now, their intelligence agency, they must be getting like constant reports of how the system is working, how intelligence is working, how they are like constantly keeping eye on Moscow and things. So you can kind of understand where Putin's paranoia is coming from.
Unlike much of the world, America's intelligence community never sat and breathed easy after 1991. The end of the Soviet Union did not mean the end of its focus on Russia. This focus was so sharp that it arguably left the United States unprepared for the September 11th terrorist attack, the wider war on terror that followed, and the rise of China in the Indo-Pacific region.
I mean, come on.
However, it was highly useful in monitoring Russia, which was still the greatest geopolitical threat to Europe, and when the opportunity opened for a meaningful intelligence partnership with Ukraine, the CIA and its peers took it.
I'm pretty sure there was a time where like Russia wanted to join NATO and they said no or something, right? Again, when you hear all these things, of course you're going to be paranoid, right? Like 9/11 happened, China is rising, but you're still keeping eye on me. You don't want me to join NATO, right? This doesn't excuse anything, obviously, but you can see where the paranoia is coming from. That's what I'm saying.
The partnership goes beyond sharing information. Personnel and infrastructure are part of it. Ukraine's intelligence network uses American equipment. Ivan Bakhanov, the former leader of Ukraine's domestic intelligence agency, the SBU, said outright that without the CIA, Ukraine would not have been able to resist the Russian invasion. But how did such a partnership begin? After all, there would be significant dangers in
without CIA, without US military, without US, let's just say.
Sharing intelligence with a country that was once part of the Soviet Union. The SBU is a direct descendant of the KGB, has the same organization, and even occupies the same building. Some of its officers were once KGB men. Some were even trained in post-Soviet Russia's FSB. The story of this intelligence revolution begins when Putin came to power at the end of 1999. At that time, the prospect of a renewed Russian threat to Europe started to become more real.
Anyway, didn't he come to power in 95 or 96? Well, 99. I'm pretty sure he was president. Then he became prime minister for some reason for a short period, and then he became president again. He's still president. I don't know what the power structure is, like who has more power. Is it president? Is it prime minister? Well, apparently Russia also has prime minister. In India, it's like full-on democracy. President is still president with all its president things. Prime minister kind of have more power because it's like public sector all around. People have more power type of way, right? But president is still more respected. President still can do president things, right?
Even as the West continued to invest a lot of diplomatic and economic resources to bring Russia in as a cooperative player in the post-Cold War order, the American intelligence community remained wary, not enjoying the so-called peace dividend. In 2005, Putin lamented that the end of the Soviet Union was the worst tragedy of the 20th century. 2 years later, he began to confirm a lot of the uneasiness of America's intelligence warriors. In Munich, he harshly criticized the United States and the post-Cold War international order. The attempt to create a world in which there was one master, one sovereign, he said, was pernicious. The following year, Putin invaded Georgia, reminding Washington's intelligence apparatus to keep itself sharp. Meanwhile, as Putin was trying to end Russia's strategic retreat, the people of Ukraine wanted to retreat from Russia with increasingly fervent intensity. In 1994, post-Soviet Ukraine agreed to give up what was then the world's third-largest nuclear arsenal in exchange for guarantees to its sovereignty and the integrity of its then recognized...
I've said in the past that that's stupid, but then I realized it's not. Even if they kept their nuclear arsenal, they couldn't do anything with it, right? Unless US basically backed them. At that time, it would become much more of an issue if that happened, right? Russia would have been too pissed off. It would have started a war. So there would be no way Ukraine could have kept that nuke and actually sustain them, like maintain them and actually make it usable. So it's like either give it away or throw it away. Like, what was that?
Borders. For the next 20 years, Russia was fine with this agreement, as it kept Ukraine within its sphere of influence through a series of puppet rulers. However, when Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych rejected the chance to deepen Ukraine's ties with the European Union in favor of even more integration with Russia, his people revolted and sent him packing to the country he really seemed to love. Yanukovych didn't go alone, though. Many of the Kremlin's most loyal assets, including top intelligence officials, went with him. The new Ukrainian regime was decidedly anti-Russia in strategic outlook and refused to toe the Kremlin's line any further. Russia's cronies sabotaged Ukraine's intelligence capacity on their way out. Documents were burned and all the computers were infected with malware. However, this proved to be a blessing in disguise. The new government's man in charge was Valentin Nalvachenko. Western intelligence agencies knew about him. He was an intelligence veteran that had reached out to his Western counterparts before, but political developments from the 1990s onward prevented the creation of a good intelligence relationship. Navlichenko understood that he needed to start the SBU over from scratch, and he wanted the CIA's help to do this. However, he had a problem on his hands. The CIA may have been cool with Navlichenko, but the agency was not cool with the SBU.
All of that. Are you telling me that Russia, when basically all the Russian, pro-Russian in Ukraine, when they ran to Russia and like burned and like destroyed all the computer, they made it easier for Ukraine's intelligence infrastructure to be more American-like because they have to like start it from scratch now? If they didn't do that, maybe they could have kept the same infrastructure, same type of thing as Russia's, right? Just like how that military and they have like MiGs and things, so it became harder to like train on F-16 and things. So you can't just like do that instantly, right? So if they kept the infrastructure of Russia and then destroy it, right, they would have a harder time like managing between like CIA and themselves. But because Russians, pro-Russian spies or whatever, destroyed all those computers and all those things, now they have to start from scratch and they can get help from USA, making it easier, right? So that backfired.
It was so infiltrated by Russian spies that the CIA viewed it as a branch of Russia's FSB. Case in point, when then CIA Director John Brennan came on a supposedly secret visit shortly afterward, Russian social media trolls mocked him and telegraphed his trip to the world. The top spooks may have fled with the former leader, but the SBU was still heavily infiltrated. But Washington wasn't keen to throw the opportunity now in front of it away. It agreed to a limited partnership with Novichenko. It would help him to root out the Russian spies in the SBU. It would also share intelligence about the separatists in Ukraine, but not information that could be used in a military setting. The Obama administration did not want to do the latter. It still believed it could repair relations with Russia, and it did not want to risk new security problems for a militarily unprepared Europe, while it attempted its pivot to Asia strategy in the wake of a rapidly emerging and much more formidable Chinese threat. Novichenko was disappointed with.
Yeah, people. There are people who like Obama, left-wingers. There are people who hate Obama, right-wingers. I'm from outside, so I'm not left or right. When I observe Obama, right, you can have opinions about him, but his strategy was all around, let's try to contain things as much as we can. Maybe you could think like, maybe that was stupid, right? Maybe this was inevitable and he should have prepared for like fighting Russia. But when it comes to me, I will never blame a person to make sure wars doesn't happen, right? Trying to make sure at least whether succeed or not. So his thing of like, let's make sure like not antagonize Russia too much. Let's not do this too much. Let's just everybody keep calm type of mentality. I respect that, right? If USA didn't have like a 2-term limit, and if Obama was still president today, would he have done something in advance that Russia-Ukraine war doesn't happen? Maybe not. Maybe it's not in his hand. But at least his strategy was to like, okay, let's everybody keep calm and not antagonize things. And he was smart, right? Whether you like it or not, even if you hate it, you have to admit that, right? He was really smart. Like, he was working really hard in all areas, right? Whether you don't agree with the way he worked, but he wasn't somebody who just like sit around or something. At least you can agree on that shit.
With this, but did all he could to help the relationship blossom. Looking back on events in an interview 10 years later, he said that within a week, 90% of the remaining top leadership in the SBU was fired. Novichenko understood that rooting out the Russian assets in the SBU was the first thing he needed to do to demonstrate to Washington that Ukraine was now serious about breaking away from Russia's orbit. Fortunately for him, American intelligence had deeply infiltrated Russia's spy networks. It had experience doing so for the better part of a century after all. The two cooperated and began removing Russian spies. Novichenko offered another attraction to build trust with his Western counterparts. Prior to
when they say removed spies, what that mean? How they removed it? Why do I see certain spy movie style shit? I'm guessing it's not going to be that flamboyant, just fired them or something, like send them back to Russia or something, I don't know.
2014, agencies like the CIA and Britain's MI6 only had a small presence in Ukraine, partially as a way to mollify Russia. This limited their potential in the country. In return for help in rooting out Russian spies, Novichenko offered to expand their capacity in the country by having the CIA train Ukraine's new counterintelligence force. The new SBU leader also forced a generational shift. He knew that he couldn't staff his new unit with people from the old organization because of how heavily infiltrated it had been. Instead, he formed a new group called the 5th Directorate. It was staffed exclusively by people that were born after or shortly before the Soviet Union's collapse and had known nothing but an independent Ukraine. The new posture of the SBU quickly proved itself as Novichenko deployed his agents to root out Russian spies throughout Ukraine. Kherson was a particular hotspot. There and elsewhere, Ukraine's new counterintelligence teams began capturing Russian assets at a high rate. They were successful in infiltrating separatist areas too. The Ukrainians transmitted this information to Washington in a steady stream from the beginning. They also tipped the UN off to many of the crimes that Russia was committing on Ukrainian soil. Ukraine made the most of all of this in the wake of a tragedy. Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 was shot down in separatist-controlled airspace in eastern Ukraine. Both sides blamed the other for the incident, but unfortunately for the Russians and their separatist allies, the new SBU would prove itself here. The 5th Directorate intercepted a call involving Igor Bezler, a separatist leader. The call tipped him off about a bird flying toward him only 2 minutes before Flight 17 was hit. 20 minutes later, Bezler called a Russian intelligence official and said that a plane had been shot down. The rebels even confirmed that this conversation took place, but that it supposedly referred to a Ukrainian aircraft. The timing was a little too convenient though. The 5th Directorate also developed human sources behind the lines and
okay, isn't that definition of terrorism? It's one thing to have like a fighting states, even being, like, okay, you're still trying to fight state. But if you shoot down civilian plane, that is some insane shit, right? And I don't know, man, how many people were there, like, they were, like, not Russian or Ukrainian, somebody else, right? Some other countries. Wouldn't they be pissed off? Like, are you kidding me right now? Right? Whenever I see that, it's just like, it's like a panic scenario, right? I mean, I know flying is safer than driving. Being an Indian, that's really true. But I don't know, when I see this type of things, like, damn it, there's some small level of fear trying to fly, especially with the recent news of plane malfunction and shit, right? I mean, that just makes sense because every year it's like flight numbers are like rising ridiculously high. Since 2016, it's just like blown up, like 100 times higher or something. How many flights are being used every day globally? So of course you're gonna have more malfunctions now, but still.
These sources helped to confirm the presence of the Buk surface-to-air missile system that was responsible for shooting the airliner down, despite the separatist forces denying possession of them. Already impressed by Ukraine's ability to root out Russian spies, the episode involving Flight 17 proved to be an important tipping point for the burgeoning relationship the CIA had with its Ukrainian counterpart. The quality of the intelligence about the airliner and the speed it was gathered convinced Obama and Brennan to increase the level of cooperation. The president did not yet clear the CIA to provide intelligence that could be militarized, but he did allow it to provide the training and equipment the Ukrainians would need to gather such intelligence on their own. Ukraine subsequently received specialized equipment, complete with CIA agents that would train their Ukrainian counterparts in using it. Some elite members of the 5th Directorate and other branches in the SBU were selected to receive intelligence training in the United States. This group of American-trained intelligence operators will become Ukraine's Unit 2245. Kirilo Budanov, Ukraine's current military intelligence leader, was among them. The partnership extended to other branches of Ukraine's security services from this point onward too. The HUR is Ukraine's military intelligence branch. It was slower to build a relationship with American intelligence agencies because of Russian infiltration and incompetence. However, upon seeing the SBU's success, General Valery Kondratyuk took similar measures when he became the HUR's leader in 2015. He steadily began to root out Russian assets.
FBI is not an intelligence, it's like a federal arm of like internal policing. I don't know. FBI doesn't have anything to do with the outside of the country, right? I mean, I've seen them making arrests outside of country, but their whole jurisdiction is inside. That's what it means, right? Well, something like CIA doesn't have any jurisdiction mostly inside the country. Their whole thing is like foreign. Well, NSA have both, I guess, because it's national security. It has to worry about security of its country, obviously, inside and outside as well, because threats might be coming from outside, especially when terrorism rose. NSA is weirdly powerful like that because they have jurisdiction on both sides. But yeah.
And using the HUR's ability to conduct foreign intelligence operations to his advantage, sent trusted agents to get information about the Russian military on Russian soil. This move was designed entirely to curry favor with the West. The general personally visited Washington and shared detailed plans about the Russian Navy, including the Kremlin's nuclear submarines. Once analysts confirmed these documents were authentic, the American intelligence community naturally began to change its opinion of Ukraine's HUR. In 2016, the CIA agreed to help modernize the HUR through training and equipment, but it demanded that the Ukrainians continued to get rid of anyone with Russian sympathies in their ranks. This phase was called Operation Goldfish. It went beyond purges, though. With the new equipment Ukraine's intelligence apparatus was getting, its capabilities greatly increased. Russian communications were increasingly now in the hands of Ukraine, thanks to the gear Washington provided. However, the training went far beyond that. Human intelligence was not ignored. Ukrainian agents were trained to assume fake Russian personas and gather secrets that way too. To support this effort, 12 hidden forward operating bases were built near the Russian border. Surprisingly, or maybe not, the Russians were largely in the dark about how robust the intelligence partnership between the two countries had become. The CIA continued to train new agents and spread them throughout Ukraine.
Okay, seriously, every time I hear information like this kind of information is available. That's how he's making this video. Why can somebody like like Call of Duty or something make an awesome game like that with the modern times and how mimic, not completely, obviously you need to keep it fictional, obviously, but like trying to root it in reality, like how things are working, espionage, this and that would be really fun, right? Because it would be really different than anything from Cold War or World Wars, right? Which basically what modern, Call of Duty does. Even with the modern warfare, it was mostly military related than espionage. Black Ops in modern times, that would be awesome, right?
They were ready for activation in case of wider Russian operations. However, the United States continued to refuse to share certain intelligence, like satellite imagery about events in Russia itself. Washington was adamant that no operations be carried out on Russian territory. Despite the worsening in relations, there were, even now, still hopes that Russia could be mollified, as countering the rising threat of China in the Indo-Pacific region remained the United States' top priority. Ukraine rankled at this prohibition, as it wanted to translate this new capability into greater lethality. The United
Problem with China is that China is, like I said in one of the videos, it's not like Soviet Union / Russia. Soviet Union, like I said, Iron Curtain drop, but did it really? Russia still kept mostly like, let's just say Russia didn't mingle with other countries that well. Not that many countries at least. But China doesn't have that kind of a mentality. China is like communist, but at the same time have a mentality of capitalism too, with the business, who want to do business with everybody and basically became really rich. They're $18 trillion economy, which is insane. Obviously, US is flying with 28 trillion, but 18 trillion is still insane because the third one is what, like 4 or 5 trillion? It's like China and US are both flying much higher compared to everybody else. So nobody has ever come close like that, like China has done, right, in the past. So China threat is different, I'm guessing, and counter it. How you gonna counter it? Like they're gonna become a juggernaut, right? Sooner or later, they will chase down USA and their economy, just the way they are functioning, just the way their doctrine is, how they're doing business, how China is like kind of important geographically as well, like how there are really rare earth elements and metals and things are in China that everybody needs, right? So world needs China for the labor and a lot of elements as well. So yeah, China's going to become powerful.
The United States still largely opposed this, which led to tensions. For example, Ukraine discovered intelligence that Russia would deploy attack helicopters to Crimea. Kondratyk sent a team of agents disguised as Russians, led by Budanov, to plant explosives, without informing Washington. The effort was unsuccessful, as a clash occurred with Russian commandos, who were tipped off thanks to a security breach in the HUR. The team led by Budanov suffered casualties and wound up having to swim back to friendly territory. It was an extraordinary feat, but nevertheless, the botched operation cost Kondratyk his job. The fallout in Washington from the failed Crimean raid was extensive, and it further demonstrated Ukraine's security problems, as a call from Vice President Biden to Ukraine's President Petro Poroshenko was intercepted and leaked on the internet. This leak added to the fallout and resulted in many American national security officials calling for the CIA's partnership with Ukraine to end. However, the partnership ultimately proved too valuable to shut down. The Ukrainian efforts were pouring intelligence on Russia into the CIA headquarters at Langley, Virginia, aiding America's already significant penetration of its old Cold War enemy. By the end of the Obama administration, the partnership had produced such results that Russian equipment like drones was routinely winding up in the CIA's hands. These drones were promptly reverse-engineered and their encryption broken. Meanwhile, on the day after the failed Crimean raid, a threat to the partnership. However, influential administration officials like CIA Director and later Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and National Security Advisor John Bolton convinced him to maintain and expand the program, building more bases in Ukraine. The efforts bore fruit quickly, as a joint effort between the CIA and the HUR led to a Russian intelligence officer giving up data which confirmed the Kremlin's links to the Fancy Bear hacking group, which had, among other things, a penchant for hacking into the campaigns of Western political parties and candidates to create electoral chaos. By 2021, when Russia was building up its forces for an invasion, the level of penetration of the Kremlin security was so extensive that Western and Ukrainian intelligence officials knew an invasion was in the works, when even the generals of the Russian units building up on the border had no idea. The intelligence partnership even obtained the plan to kill or capture President Zelensky, as well as a list of high-level Russian sympathizers Putin and his officials believe would be acceptable replacements for the Ukrainian leaders they intended to overthrow. As a result, Ukraine quickly rounded up potential sources of disunity within its own ranks. When the invasion came, all American restraints on providing actionable military intelligence to defeat Russia were lifted. Russian convoys were exposed and pointed out to Ukrainian ambushers. High-value targets were identified, sent to Ukrainian HIMARS teams, and eliminated. Poor Russian signal security greatly assisted the American and Ukrainian intelligence partnership in this work. Meanwhile, the agents that the CIA had trained throughout the country in the years prior swung into action. These agents became the core of the Ukrainian insurgency in the Russian-occupied zones, and the fact that such an insurgency exists is the result of a massive Russian intelligence failure before the war. In contrast to the increasingly accurate assessment of the area that the CIA and its Ukrainian allies were getting, Russia's intelligence apparatus was so incompetent that it ignored its own polling data, suggesting that large portions of Ukraine's population were willing to go to war to resist a Russian military incursion. As a result of the FSB's failures, Putin further believed his own hype. The idea that the population would greet Russian soldiers as liberators and throw flowers at their feet originated with the FSB. Incompetence played a large part, but the FSB's pre-war failure was also another.
I don't know if did they really believe that? Is that just a talk to give like news media or something? But I don't know, man. It doesn't matter what you are. If you're the invading party, would anybody actually greet you with open arms? Like, how would that happen? I don't know.
Another example of the success of the partnership the Ukrainians struck with the American intelligence community a decade earlier. As a result of that partnership, much of the Russian infiltration of Ukrainian society was rooted out. They might not have known it, but the FSB and its partners operated increasingly in the dark, and perhaps arrogant about their previous success, overestimated their capabilities. This would describe Russia's attitude about Ukraine as a whole too. If Russia had launched its full-scale invasion 10 years ago, the story in Ukraine might have turned out very differently. However, the intelligence Ukraine now has access to, and the force of veteran operatives it built up from 2014 onward, has kept it in the fight against its larger and wealthier neighbor 2.5 years on. And unlike the seesaw of war, this is an advantage it has never lost. What do you think about the intelligence partnership between Ukraine and its...
Yeah, that is interesting. The most surprising thing about this video is that I always assumed everybody was caught off guard, right? Even though I knew that US had given intelligence that Russia is preparing for war, where a lot of people, including Europe, didn't take that seriously. But I didn't know like Ukraine already knew that. I didn't know Ukraine and the USA was like joined together and they were actually preparing for it in advance. That's a surprising news to me because I always thought even Ukraine was caught off guard, right? I don't know. I don't know about that intelligence that much because yes, USA would have provided intelligence to Ukraine, like Russia is planning to attack, but I don't think Ukraine took that seriously, right? Just if I analyze like first few days of the invasion, how they are caught off guard, because they could have done a lot with it, even in few days, to curb that upcoming invasion, right? Because they got all the way close to Kyiv, right, and many places at the start of the day because Ukraine was caught off guard as well. So I don't know about like they already knew it and they were given intelligence, but did they really act on it? I don't know. But yeah, this whole infrastructure of CIA and with Ukrainian intelligence is interesting, right? What if Russia, after the fall of Soviet Union, actually played as a friend to Ukraine and treat them that way and trying to create this kind of like a really strong relationship where they don't have to like do all these things and just like create a buffer state by just being friend? But then again, would that have worked? Would Ukraine ever do that, knowing the past, right? It's like, breaking away from something and just like, okay, that's something trying to be a friend. You're like, I see through you what you're trying to do. I don't think that would have ever worked, right? But who knows? Maybe just like diplomacy and trying to be friends and allies would have worked better for Russia if they did that with Ukraine. Who knows? But I don't know. Right, well, you won't believe how the CIA is helping Ukraine win the war. I knew that, like, yeah, no way without intelligence any of these things happen. Yeah, this was the military show. If you like my next one, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.